Okay, sit. If you are, a Jew, there are practices, etc.
If you're a pagan, get in a circle.
If you're a pagan, get in a circle. And we draw on so many sources, and there's no particular thing that we say, yes, if you're a Christian, pray. We don't have a specific practice that we say, oh, yes, this is what Unitarian Universalists do. Because that's part of the point, right? So now what? I'm here, my soul has just totally been, or something in me is sparking alive, and now what do I do with it? And Wellspring was intended to be an answer to that, at least in part. How can you be it was created essentially to give people the now what, not an answer to now what, but rather just paths that you might walk, and also that we could walk side by side. And so today, what Carolyn and I are going to do is lead you through an abbreviated Wellspring session to give you a sense of what it is. And then we'll share the format, and we will give you a chance to do participate in it, in some of it. We're not going to do the whole thing, but you'll participate some, be able to share. And I want to say that Wellspring is essentially a covenant group. Small group ministry, covenant, yes.
I'm getting my ears checked.
And it is it's a covenant group that has a more specific emphasis on spiritual practice. The covenant groups, as we have in this congregation, are a little bit less guided in a particular way. So, also want you to know, and you might want to talk about it here or later. With the covenant group thing, we had several covenant groups. There was a really, really vital program. COVID hit. We kept going for a couple of weeks online, months, years online, and then they just sort of petered out. And so we're going to be laying the groundwork for them and getting them up and running again in January. Don Henniger is one of the people. He doesn't want to be the only one, but wants to help organize. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah,
use the mic, because there are people on Zoom. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm particularly drawn to covenant groups, having cut my teeth here when I first joined. I found covenant groups as a newbie to be a wonderful way to enter into community here, to learn the rules of engagement, and I came away much changed and a devotee of covenant groups, and have participated since we've had them, on Zoom, online, a hybrid, but nothing that compares to us sitting in a circle, sharing our heart stories. So I'll be sending out emails to folks that I know who are interested. Steve has suggested that he might be interested, but I'm always looking for people who want to help facilitate, as well as folks who are interested in joining. Yeah. So that's coming up. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Anybody want me to reach out to them sooner than later? Just let me know.
Yeah. We'll be putting out more announcements about that. Did you want to add anything to what I said? Okay. Today, I don't think longer than an hour. Okay. We started a little bit late. I hope to be done by 12:30. So it should be fine. Okay. And what I am going to then go before I take more questions, or anyway, just tell you a little bit more about some of the components of this that distinguish it from our covenant group stuff. The kind of connection you make is as strong, but it's around slightly different things per se. So one of the things that Wellspring is distinct about Wellspring is everyone is invited to try on spiritual practice or practices And some people, when they're doing this, they pick one and they stick with it, and other people try out a few different ones. We start with a book called Everyday Spiritual Practice by, it's a compilation by Reverend Scott Alexander, and there are, it's all about different practices that mostly you use. He is a UU minister. I mean, there are just so many of them, different practices. So we ask people, if you're lost for something, you can try one out in this book. And we have some copies of this. Some people buy them, and we also have some copies.
Can I record this?
It's being recorded.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thank you. So anyway, that's one of the ways, and you just do it. And then we also ask people, as part of it, to work with a spiritual coach, which is somebody just to check in with more deeply about your spiritual practice and how it's going. We talk to each other about that, and yet we don't have time to go really deep into each individual's practice. And, you know, generally people meet with their spiritual coach about once a month or so, finding your own rhythm. We have lots of options, recommendations, and some of them are low or no cost. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that doesn't, so cost should not be an obstacle to this in terms of getting, there are a few books to buy. And we have some copies that we can lend or, you know, help get some more for folks. There is some reading between the sessions. Sometimes it's more than another. This is a book, it's the first book that people are invited to read. It's called A Hidden Wholeness by Parker Palmer. And it's about spiritual practice and living a soul, you know, finding the wholeness that we all have within us. That I think that's the point of spiritual practice, is to touch that wholeness, and the world so often pulls us away from that wholeness and that center. So he's marvelous. So, you know, this is the longest book. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, so there is some reading. Sometimes there's more than others in terms of the sessions. It's not onerous generally. And everyone is encouraged to come to all the sessions, even if you haven't read a dang thing. The reading will probably enhance your understanding and the discussion, but it's not absolutely necessary. And so the coming together is the most important thing. And the only other thing is we do ask people to make a commitment, make the group a priority. That doesn't mean you've written anything in blood and you'll be chastised if you don't come. But it's the same thing. The covenant groups do this, right, as well. I mean, generally, you say, yeah, this is a priority in my life, I will come. If I can't, I will let you know. And it won't be, I'll try to make certain that it's not very often, as certain as I can. That sort of thing. Do you have anything to add?
I would just add that as far as coming to the group, there's that accountability factor that brings us all together, because if one person's missing, the group isn't the same. Like, every single person's input is so valuable that it means a lot if everybody's there. And then the other part is that it mirrors our life. Like, if you don't have time to do the reading, or your spiritual practice falls away because you get too busy, then, you know, it's like you see that everybody is struggling with those same things. Like, they're busy, and that everything's okay, and that, you know, life keeps going. And so I like that too, that whether you've done the reading or not, it's just important to show up.
And if you have a spiritual practice and you didn't do it a single time for the entire in-between time, come, because there may be somebody else who said, well, I did mine once, you know, so that's part of the point, is being on a journey together and figuring this out. And somebody else may have a thing, well, I was really struggling, and then I figured out a way that it fits into my day, and I'm doing it more, and that might be the thing that helps you. So it's that kind of working together. So any questions, and we'll pass the mic that you have. We're about to go in to do an abbreviated session, or comments, because Ruth has done this.
I was going to say, I did it. It was very life-changing.
I was very visible, the success on spiritual practice that I have not maintained, so I will be honest about that. I struggled all the way through finding, but I tried a bunch of them, got excited about it, and about a month later, it was like, okay, what else can I try? So it is a journey. I loved it. I'm thinking about taking it again. The questions that I have, as you said, starting in January, and, okay.
That's covenant groups. Wellspring would start at the end of September.
Oh, well, that's what I was thinking. And it's
Sorry.
twice a month?
Every 2 weeks?
Yeah, twice a month.
Twice a month.
Twice
yeah.
a month, okay.
Twice a month, okay.
And it's, I can't remember, how long is it, 2 hours? 2 hours, okay, yeah. I think we'll decide daytime or nighttime.
We have to figure out the time that's
and the
going to work
dates,
for people.
Because I'm going to be gone the whole month of January, so I'm like,
Yeah.
I have to
All right.
play with this idea.
So yeah, thank you for asking to clarify that. The Wellspring program is going to start at the end of September. It is a covenant group. That's what we're talking about now. Also, just wanting to be sure that people know that we're going to restart our covenant group program, which is not quite as focused, or you don't do reading much in between and that kind of thing. It is different. This is more, and it's more specifically Unitarian Universalist. We learn about UU history and heritage and theology a little bit and talk about it, so you can come up with your own, essentially, Unitarian Universalist theology, because we have theologies. We don't have one. We have theologies. So anyway, so just thank you for making that distinction.
Question?
Yep.
Where am I going to find a spiritual advisor?
You go.
Yeah, there's a whole list, well, there's actually a directory of they're called spiritual directors. There's UU spiritual directors, people that are trained, that meet with you. There are students in spiritual direction that will do it gratis as they're trying to get their hours to become credentialed as spiritual directors. There are, so there's, a whole range of options. Send you to the website for spiritual directors, or give you a list, or also just, we can help you if you're struggling finding someone, we can make suggestions too.
Yeah, and I think there are some groups too.
Yeah, so there's some spiritual direction groups where it's like one spiritual director meets with a small group of people. And I'll just say, I was like, I don't know about this spiritual direction thing when I started, because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know, what am I going to say to this person, right? It seems so strange, to be, but it's a chance for you to say whatever is on your mind. And these people are trained to listen, and I found it to be incredibly valuable and far less intimidating than it sounds.
Yeah.
Maybe I missed it, but I know with covenant groups, there are covenant group leaders. Are there Wellspring group leaders that lead each group? How does that work?
What we have done is Carolyn and I led a group, and then Carolyn and Rosanna led a
Just me.
Just you, okay. And I don't know how many people we're going to have. I'm not certain that we have. I'm going to facilitate this group this year. Maybe someone can join me. Hold on one sec. And and we can have, somewhere 8 to 10 to 12 people in the group, and I will be facilitating it. Yeah. And we may get partners in that. So any other questions? The question is whether it's going to be on Zoom or not. And one of the things we need to figure out is whether it's going to be. That I want to know how many people are interested in doing that way, and we have to figure out time and logistics and a lot of stuff. So it's an option, it's not a certainty at this point. Yes. Okay, so, I didn't need to double up. So we're going to do is start leading a session abbreviated. And we do a chalice lighting and sort of opening gathering. And also then we have a check-in. We're not going to check in today. We have a check-in with certain specific questions. We're not going to check in today in that way because that's one of the ways we're abbreviating it. And we don't all know each other. So would you turn that on, pass it to Don? Would you please say your name and just how long you've been part of the congregation and nothing more?
Don, 5
Months, years,
years.
decades?
Years.
Robert, and seems like between 10 and 20 years, somewhere around there.
Ruth, and I think it's been 6 or 7 years.
Hi, I'm Hia. I've been a member here about 7 or 8 years.
Rita, and it's, 20 years or so.
Teresa, I would say 8 years.
Ruth Capel, as opposed to Ruth Owen. And I think about 7 years, 6 or 7.
Chris, about 4 years here in Ventura and about 26 years in Santa Monica.
Martha, about 8 or 9 months.
Karen, since 2005.
Jeanette, and since my parents sent me to the UU Church in Dallas when I was 12, I am not confessing how long I have known about UU, but I have been part of this congregation for perhaps going on 40 years.
Kathy, and I'm 15 years.
Terry, here, 2015, and I've been members of churches in Ann Arbor and Sarasota, Florida since 1987.
Jay, a few months.
Steve, 28 years.
Reverend Dana, this is now my 8th year starting here. I've been a UU since sometime in the 90s.
Carolyn, I guess it's 9 years because I was here a year before you.
Okay, so we will thank you and welcome everyone. Knowing each other is part of what this is about. Okay, so we are going to do a shortened version of a session that is called Our Question Mark Faith. And it's a session that goes a little into UU history and how we have defined what it is to be a Unitarian or a Universalist over time, and a little bit of theology. And it just felt like a good one to, that we could talk about a little bit together. So each session begins first with silence that is like 5 or 10 minutes of silence, which is just this really sweet gathering thing. Often there's music, sweet gathering, and then a chalice lighting and a reading. And I'm going to ask us, let's just go into silence for, we're abbreviating this. Let's just do a minute of just arrive, breathe, be here.
The Center by Lao Tzu. We join spokes together in a wheel, but it is the center whole that makes the wagon move. We shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. We hammer wood for a house, but it is the inner space that makes it livable. We work with being, but non-being is what we use.
So that is an abbreviated beginning, and then we do a check-in. And we check in with the usual kinds of things, what's going on in your life, et cetera. But also it's a check-in potentially about your spiritual practice and how it's going. And these are the questions. You can choose whichever one you want to answer. We're not going to, as I said, we're not going to check in today, but just to let you know, these are the questions that we ask as the check-in. What are you carrying in your heart tonight? How is your spiritual practice going? How is your work going with your spiritual coach or director? You know, all that sort of thing you can check in about. And we take some time with it. It's not, you know, it's not, oh, I'm fine. My practice is kind of sucky, and I haven't met with a spiritual coach yet, so boom. You know, it doesn't go on for 5 minutes each, but, you know, a solid amount of time to check in and show up as who you are and where things are in your life and your practice. And one of the things that is similar to covenant groups is that the group, so we will have, the opening session will be a retreat that is how long?
2.5 hours.
Okay, there's about 2.5 hour opening session. And one of the main things that the first session does is the group creates a covenant about how do we want to be together? What are, I don't want to call them rules, but, you know, the guides for how we will be together. And if things, you know, one of the things is like, how do we practice deep listening? You know, one of the things is almost people do not talk over each other, like at all, except sometimes we need reminders, all of us. And, you know, and we don't respond necessarily back. It's not a, oh, that, you know, any sort of response back, there's also, there's no fixing, no saving, no advising, no setting each other straight, which is one that I think the covenant groups have. It actually comes, that is from Parker Palmer. And the no fixing, no advising, no setting each other straight, man, is that hard. You know, because somebody will say something, and golly, you just have a great idea. Man, you know exactly what they should do about it. You don't get to say it. So, and we agree on those ground rules. It's more than ground rules. It's the promises that we make to one another, and it also allows for, okay, what do we do when something goes a little bit sideways? So the first session, the group creates its covenant, but then that is a living document. It's not like, this is it, written in stone, we're done. It can change over time. Something may happen and somebody goes, oh, you know what? Our covenant didn't quite cover that. Let's add this sentence in there. Or sometimes people do, you know, the dynamics get a little tense, or there's confusion or whatever. And so we go back to the covenant and say, how can we use this to help us find our way through this to get back on the same page? So we make the covenant at first, and the session also then goes to a check-in about the covenant. How's it going? Is this working for us? Do we need to change it? Et cetera. At the beginning, you do more of that. And toward the end, we're like, yeah, the covenant's fine. We've been through that enough times, we're good. But there is a chance, and it's also a chance when somebody says, you know, I actually didn't feel good about something in the last time, and I felt like we were a little bit out of covenant. I want to talk about whatever. So we do that. So that's the opening, that's the beginning. And then the major part of the session, it's really simple. There's a discussion. There's usually been some readings of some kind. And then you discuss it. We have questions, and people just discuss their answers to the questions. You know, we ask people to read or journal, and then we ask these questions. Now's the meat. This is the part that we'll have a chance to experience a little bit more. And this is directly from the session I was telling you about. UU Wellspring is offering us a spiritual journey in several dimensions, talking about our own inner spiritual journeys, which change over the course of the year, though not always in predictable ways. And it's attempting to be helping people become knowledgeable about the historical and theological roots of Unitarian Universalism. And we hope that this program will kindle a sense of how you live your faith in the world. And these questions that I'm about to ask you are pointing us toward thinking more deeply about the history of this tradition, and then moving into theology and UU principles and values. And I just chose, there's a whole list of suggested questions, which you will get ahead of time. And I picked 3 of them today. And so and then we're gonna pass the mic, or I think maybe we ought to just pass it around. Which we don't, we popcorn it, but in this case, let's just go around. 3 questions that I ask all of you, and you can pass, to share relatively briefly about today. And so here are the questions. What aspects of your religious past do you treasure? You don't have to answer all 3. You pick one. What aspects of your religious past do you treasure? What or what have you discarded from your religious past? Why? First question. Second, which of our UU principles most resonates with you, and why? Are there any that do not reflect your beliefs and thinking? And the UU principles will have been part of the reading. And so if you've got them in your head, you can answer that one. If you don't yet have them in your head, you don't have to. And then another question is, what binds us together as a church? And that might be this church. It might be as a faith tradition like Unitarian Universalism. And where do we have differences? So when you get to this session, if you're part of the group, when you get to this session, you'll have read some things that will help spark some of that. But these were more general questions that I thought we could answer. Would anyone like to begin just answering that one of those questions, or whatever has come up in you hearing those questions? And we'll just go around. Teresa.
Teresa,
Thank you.
I was sort of raised Catholic. My mother was very Catholic. She passed when I was 6 years old. And my father kept her wishes and had us go to church and make our communion and so on. He dropped us off at church. He wasn't into it. It was meaningless pretty much to me. But a practice that I like, although I don't believe it, but I like, is speaking to my mother. Her mother, my grandmother, told me after my mother died that she can see you. And like I said, I don't actually know that there's an afterlife. However, I do speak to my mother sometimes, and I think that's related to my background. That's all.
Okay. I'm not doing all 3. You want me to do all 3? No, we don't have time for all 3. But why don't Rita or Ruth, does either of you want to go next? Okay. And we'll just go around.
Okay, I'm addressing the first question that you had, if I recall correctly. What practice did you, of your previous experience, is important or was important to you?
Yeah, it says, do you treasure? But yes, that's a good
treasure,
translation,
right.
yes.
Without going into my background, which I basically discarded when I was 14, I then had, in my 20s, 4 years, not consecutively, experience of teaching in an Episcopalian prep school. And there began every day, every weekday, with about 20 or 30 minutes of chapel. And we, as faculty, had to show up. And at first I was resistant to this. Why should I? And I don't believe this anyhow. I don't belong. But I came to cherish those 20 quiet minutes. Because my life then went into the classroom, and you were always, and these are teenagers, I was teaching high school, always under pressure and be responsive. And when I came home, in my second 2 years, I had 2 small children by then, so I was always jumping around in response to others. Those 20, 25 minutes became very precious. The music, whatever prayer, it was said in a quiet voice. It was quiet, it was thoughtful. It wasn't spiritual, I wouldn't have thought of it as spiritual, but it helped me center in a quiet way.
Thank you.
I can never remember.
Should I read the questions again? now
Principal,
that
no,
we've
no, no,
started? Oh,
no,
sorry.
but just, you can just fill in, the principle that I'm thinking of is the
Oh.
interdependence of all.
Interdependent, we affirm and promote the interdependent web of all creation,
Ah,
of
yes.
which we are a part.
There you go.
Do you want to say a little bit about why it resonates?
Well, through my spiritual practice of meditation, I've viscerally realized that.
Okay.
And I forget, and I try to remember. So it's very central to me.
I'm one of the cradle Catholics that came up through probably the first 20 years and then tossed it out. But now that I've gotten past 70, I realize and starting to treasure that there's still a whole lot of that in me. And it's certainly a basis for me, and I like that. It's in some ways it's somewhat embarrassing, but it's a big part of me, and it's nice to it's like finding an old friend in some ways.
Excuse me, Karen. I think I like the same principle that she said with the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Okay. That one's always resonated with me, and it dovetails into my work life because I'm a mental health therapist. And so it goes with our code of ethics and my moral values, and it just all fits together, and I just love it.
Jeanette, I actually realized that I meant to get a piece of paper and have you just give me your name and email address. You keep going, I'm gonna go get a thing to pass around for that, so I don't have to try to remember who the heck was here.
Well, I think I want to share about an early experience I had after I started going to the Unitarian Church, and
God, how many people was
I was part of what was then called Liberal Religious Youth, and we had all kinds of conferences. And one of the times I went to the conferences, there was a time when we were asked to come up with a spiritual value, I suppose. I don't know if that was the word that was used. And I remember we went off by ourselves and we kind of meditated and wrote, and I came back and I had chosen beauty as my central thing, and I knew why I had chosen it, and that it didn't mean, looking cute when you got dressed up, and it was a very broad term for me. And I remember sharing it, and that nobody got it, and they all seemed to think that was an extremely weird thing, that I hadn't picked justice or And, those are all values that I care about too. But that was an interesting, it was both, because I never said, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I was very clear why I had chosen it. And so, and if I had not belonged to the UU church at that time and been part of that group, I'm sure no other religious groups gathering would have allowed me to do that. So that's something I'm very grateful for, which may be unfair to other religious groups.
Interested in Wellspring, name, and your email if you're not already in the directory. I think most of you are. I'm not certain that we have your info. But just write your name then, because I have your emails already.
I guess I would say, with the first question, I went to a lot of different types of religious interactions throughout my life and was never a member. I guess I wasn't really a member of the Catholic Church when I converted to Catholicism to marry my first husband, but I did like the I don't know, the gloriousness of the church when you walked in. It was like so holy feeling. I mean, that's the only thing about the Catholic Church that I really like is the holiness that's in there. Don't believe anything that they have to say of service. So, but when I got to this church, coming to see my daughter sing because the offering was being given away to prototypes where she recovered from meth addiction, she turned around and said, "Mom, this church sounds just like you." And I had already was having that feeling, and I have been coming back ever since. It's been a total life-changing, on a spiritual path that I'm sure I was searching for and didn't even know it. And I'm just more grateful that I can even ever express.
You can pass if you want to. That's always an option. You don't have to answer. I just saw your face. It was an interesting face.
Well, the first part,
A little bit closer to you.
the first part I'll say, maybe not the second part, okay? First part, I was pretty much able to avoid any kind of religious, my youngest years, 4 to 9, okay? I was able to avoid it because I think I was lucky enough. One side of the family was Episcopal, and the other was Baptist, Northern. And I remember my first impression going to Sunday school at the insistence of my grandmother, and you're indoctrinated. I've always had a fear of being indoctrinated. Very, I guess I do not accept what you hear as doctrine. It's just my nature. And that includes when I had to sing, "Jesus loves me, yes, I know." I just thought, this is a crock, okay. Phase 2. This is the part I'm going to have a hard time going into. The question was your coping mechanisms and what is our ability to meditate, if you will. All I can say, I'm a very fatalistic person. I've always felt lost since my great-grandmother died. I've always felt that life is so short. You live, you die, you have horrible bosses, and you make money and you die, okay? And so some of those attitudes might be something I'm really reluctant to share, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jay. I consider that I am a religious and spiritual person based on two things that happened to me. When I was between the ages of about 5 and 6, I lived in an apartment with my mother and grandmother, one-bedroom apartment, and every night before I went to bed, I don't know which one of them encouraged me, because I don't know that either was religious, but they had me go on my knees and say a prayer on the side of my bed. And I did that. I prayed that way, and I don't even know what I said, but I did that for a number of months, and that really stuck with me. And then when I was in my 50s, I had a 45-minute commute driving from Thousand Oaks to West Ventura. And as I was going over the Santa Clara River Bridge, with the construction going on, I was listening to books on tape to make the commute go, and I was listening to somebody who said that God exists within each of us. And that just really resonated with me. It was like a aha moment for me. And ever since those two experiences, I felt that I've been a very deeply spiritual and religious person.
When I went through a divorce with my first marriage, and I had a 6-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter, I had to come by the house to pick up some things, and I was distraught. And my neighbor was out throwing a Frisbee for his dog, and he saw me crying, and he came up to me, and he asked me what was wrong, and I just told him I'm going through a tough time, a divorce. And he said, well, you know, Jesus died for your sins. And that was the hook for me. And he went and got a little pocket Bible and started reading verses. Long story short, I started going to Christian businessmen's breakfasts, where men would get up and share their testimony. And then I started going to Bible studies. Long story short, that was all rejected over the years. It gave me a lot of inner peace when I was going through that time in my life, where I could hang my hat on that, where I ultimately got to, which is the place I am right now. I don't have that afterlife message to look forward to, or salvation, or whatever, all the teachings that go with Christianity. And I've had to look really deeply into myself and into my own process and discover who I am. Meditation has really helped me. I have 2 spiritual teachers on the COM website, Jeff Warren and Tamara Levitt, that lead me every day through new teachings, new awarenesses, and I feel like I've continued to grow in that regard.
So I just want to say that we apparently have 4 people out on Zoom, and they're going to put something into the chat that Brian is going to capture and share with us. Facilitators participate fully in the thing, but just given the time and everything, and just that I just stood up and spoke for 15 minutes and more, I'm not going to right now. I'm going to move on.
I'll make mine quick, but I gotta say, a plug for interdependence. I almost said an amen when you brought up President Roosevelt. He said interdependence, and I just delight in looking through my whole life and seeing where, because like people talk about interdependence everywhere, and I just go, yeah. So interdependence is my favorite principle at this point.
Thank you. What I've kept and what I've let go of in my spiritual life since I was a kid, what I've let go of was everything about it. If it looked like a church or felt like a church, I didn't want anything to do with it. I was reacting to rejection from my church about who I am as a man, who I am as a gay man, that didn't fit. So I don't fit, I reject you first. But what I kept, I thought, there's nothing I kept, nothing I would want, nothing I could feel good about. And then I remembered, I used to love to go to Sunday school. It was friggin' arts and crafts. So I didn't get any Jesus, I was making stuff. So that was my joy that I have kept, and I do cherish that time. Particularly Bible school in the summer. oh man, that was just total arts and crafts and hiking and doing all those good things. The spiritual practice of interconnectedness is foundational to me in my relationship with non-human beings.
My name's Robert Schleifer, or Robert, and I was born Jewish, mother and grandmother both Jewish, as were my father and grandfather on both parents. I resented, of course, being the firstborn, I was made to go to study with the rabbi on Saturdays. And, I went to school on Monday through Friday. Then Saturday had to study with the rabbi to read from the Torah. And then had to go to synagogue on Sundays. So I didn't have any time off to myself. And so I resented that. And when it came to the time when I was 13 to be bar mitzvahed, the rabbi, I read from the Torah that I had been studying with him, but I didn't know what any of the words meant. So when he put his hands on my head, it was all I could do to keep from barfing. And so that was that. I'm trying to think of another time when it'll come to me later.
Okay, Ruth, and I grew up without any real religious background, except Judaism was in there, but none of my family practiced it, except we did a Seder. I always considered myself Jewish, even though I knew nothing about it. I did start going to synagogue. In fact, I've been a member of Temple Beth Torah now for 30 plus years. I still am a member. And the one thing that I got out of Judaism, I love all the traditions and stuff, but the one thing I got out of Judaism was their strong sense of charity, of how important charity is. The one thing I got that I couldn't stomach as I got older was the concept of the belief in God, because I do not have a belief in God. And when I came here and found out, one, it was perfectly okay not to believe in God, and you could be very spiritual without that, and the opportunity for me to both be charitable with my funds and with my time, oh my God, I just blossomed and I love it. And that's a lot of what I love about here.
I'm Yukio. I was born and raised as a Buddhist, living in Denver, Colorado. And the reason I was living in Denver at the time was my family had been in a relocation camp during World War II. And after the war, they moved up to Denver. And I remember going to a very Americanized Buddhist church that I think my parents sent me almost mainly for socialization, because otherwise I had very little contact with other Japanese Americans. I remember vividly my mother praying every day in front of what's called an obutsudan, which is a very ornate, beautiful box, basically a miniature temple. And even though I went to a Buddhist church for a number of years and heard all the teachings, it never really sank in. And as an adult, for 50 years, I really had no religious practice. And I think I've said this before in other groups. Ironically, it was when I went to a UU church that I rediscovered my Buddhist roots. And I still remember 1994 was one of the more difficult years of my life, and a friend invited me to go to a neighborhood church in Pasadena I knew nothing about UUism. But one of the things I did early on was they offered a meditation class that I took. And that's where I rediscovered my Buddhist-related meditation practice. And that's what I've been doing ever since. The teacher of that class at Neighborhood Church became basically my spiritual teacher, mentor for many years until he died a few years back. And fortunately, I have a Buddhist monk who has been my mentor for at least 10 years, and who actually was part of my wedding ceremony at Neighborhood Church in 1999. So I'll leave it at that.
Rita, and I think music is really something that I treasured from the early religion. I mean, my parents actually, there was a Pentecostal minister who lived next door, and so my parents said, hey, let's set the kids, and like we had the whole, morning off. So anyway, we went there, and but as soon as I went into the main sanctuary or whatever, I never wanted to go back. I was scared as hell. So I didn't want to do that. And then also my dad, he never wanted to do anything. He says, I really think churches and temples, they need to pay taxes. And what the hell? And so he didn't, anyway. And I thought my dad was pretty wise, so I had to kind of respect his opinion about that. And then when I was in high school, I actually joined a youth group and ended up going to a Bible college. But then as and get a little bit older and all of that, I rejected all of those things. But my dad actually was kind of adopted by a Jewish family, and I had a Jewish boyfriend in high school. So I really believed in the Jewish, principles and all that. So when my son got to be about, 8 years old, and we had already been, since Bob's Jewish, we'd already been doing a lot of Jewish rituals together. And so we eventually then joined the temple. And I joined the temple choir, and like I said, the music is kind of the thing that runs through everything. And anyway, the thing that I really value about actually Judaism, and especially the High Holy Days and Yom Kippur, is the spiritual practice of asking people for forgiveness and healing relationships, because that's, what Yom Kippur actually is kind of all about. So, yeah, that's, yeah.
So Wendy is, and I'm sorry I didn't invite you into the circle, Wendy, when you arrived, but.
No, I just, Julie Moore said, hey, you should go. So I said, okay, I'll come see what, Wendy Laughlin. When I was growing up, my parents were both fallen away Catholics, so the bad parts of the experiences or whatever came in their generation, so I didn't have to go through that. So we were just like not religious, and they would call themselves agnostic, and I would say I was atheist just to get some of the religious kids off of you. I finally found that worked really well, so that was pretty much my beginnings of.
So Brian, do we have the Zoom things? And you're just going to read them for us?
Yes, there's just one comment right now from B. Lutterbuck, and her comment is this: what I treasure is the fact I wasn't raised.
Could you speak a tiny bit louder?
Yes, I can. How's that?
Say the name again. Better.
B. Lutterbeck?
Oh, yes, B.
Her
Lutterbeck.
comment is this: what I treasure is the fact that I wasn't raised in any one religion. I'm going to get some feedback here. My mother, a Holocaust survivor, and there is no God. My father was a non-practicing Christian. All my friends took me to their churches and temples. The gift I received was a view that many paths lead to the top of the spiritual mountain. There are so many commonalities among all the world religions. Problems, dogmatism of most. Love you, as faith with no dogma, leads with love and commonality of all beings.
Thank you, B, and all of you in Zoom. Again, you don't have to, when we're doing things, you can pass, you can do what you want. I want to thank you. This was an example of how it goes. And we do have time, in the group, it's not this short. And, there's time to go in a little bit deeper. But I want to thank you for just sharing what you did. I mean, there's a lot going on in all of us. And one of the things that Wellspring is for is to be in a place with other people to share it, to actually speak it and share and go a little bit deeper. And I want to thank you all for sharing some tender things. And, this is intimate stuff. This is really deep inside of us. And it's a place for us to show up and do that. And I just want to wind up. I thought this would take about an hour, which it has, although we started after 11:30. So we do something, and we go around more than once and, and have that discussion. Always the sessions then end with a so what. Is like, after all of this discussion, what do we, essentially is, some version of what does this discussion and what you've heard and spoken mean to you about how you're going to carry it out into the world again. I don't know what that is, what are you called to do in your life because of this? And it might be great big, and it might be just, I'm going to do my practice one more day a week or something. And then we close with, by offering gratitudes and a farewell, just a very simple, go around, this is what I'm grateful for. Either in the session or just in life in general, that kind of thing. And then we extinguish the chalice, and we go forth for another couple of weeks. And then come back, do a little bit of reading, do a little bit of writing, do a little bit of practicing, come back and talk about some more stuff.
Next week?
No. It starts in September, and it's every 2 weeks. It's twice a month. So if I misspoke, forgive me. It's every two. It's actually it's 8 or 9, more likely. Sometimes. How many total sessions do you remember?
17.
There's 17 total sessions.
It's over 8 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
2 times a month for about 8 months.
Yeah.
For about 8 months. And then because, holidays get in the way, it might be more like 9 months to fit them all in, that sort of thing. So we'll start at the end of September and go, you all can do that. I don't actually have to take the time to count out on my fingers where it goes. Okay. So that is the presentation that we have. I will email y'all and just say, what are your interests? What are your needs? What are your availabilities? And we'll try to figure this out. If what you've heard here is like, yeah, well, that's really cool, but not now, or no, I'm going to wait for the covenant groups to start in January, or whatever, that's totally fine. Just let me know. Zoomsters, I'm going to have Brian get your names, and then I'll email you. Anyway, so this is I'm perfectly happy to stick around and answer more questions. It's now 1:45, so I don't know what y'all want to do. So, cool. Thank you.
Since I did take it, if anybody wants to talk to me, I'd be happy to.